Good morning and welcome to the second annual Tasveer South Asian Lit Fest, also known as TSAL. I'm Roshni Karthikeyan and I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager at Tasveer. TSAL brings together an eclectic group of poets, novelists, screenwriters, and non-fiction and experimental writers expressing a wide range of South Asian diasporic voices on race, immigration, gender, identity, and publishing. TSAL is brought to you by Tasveer, a social justice arts organization based out of Seattle, Washington. Our mission is to inspire social change through films, arts, and storytelling. If you're enjoying TSAL and our other programming, please follow us on our social media channels with the handle at Tasveer Seattle and subscribe to our YouTube page. To help us continue to bring year-round South Asian programming to you, please go to our website www.tasveer.org to donate. Your support means a lot to us. Many thanks to our local literary refuge in Seattle, the Elliott Bay Book Company, Ada's Technical Books and Cafe, and Hugo House. If you wish to purchase books by the authors featured in TSAL, please visit our website for the virtual bookstore and support our festival, our favorite local stores, Elliott Bay and Eyre's. We'd also like to thank our partner Plurality University Network and big thanks to our sponsors Du Bois Carey, Madison Avenue Realty, Cities of Seattle, Bellevue, and Redmond, For Culture, Arts Washington, Arts Fund, UW South Asia Center, and the Gardner Center for Asian Art and Ideas. Thanks to all our panelists and you, our audiences, for making this festival possible. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge those indigenous nations and people on whose lands we live and work. We at Tasveer acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe. We also work in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. To all of you watching, we will be taking your questions, so please post your comments and questions in the live chat box. If you like our program, please like this video so the YouTube algorithm lets more people know we have an interesting stream going on here. Now, moving on to today's program. Today, we are joining for the panels, Not Just ABCD, A New Generation in Children's and Young Adult Literature. This panel is specifically special to me because growing up, I felt I was not exposed enough to enough South Asian books. And I'm so excited to see so many South Asian books that all the kids now can read and enjoy. And we at Tasveer wanted to bring all of that to you through TSAL. This panel will be done twofold. In the first half, we'll hear from our wonderful children's books writers, Meera Shriram and Ruxana Khan, moderated by our parent-daughter duo. We have mom Siddhika Shanawaz behind the screens and young and excited moderator Zara. Zara has just started middle school and loves music, reading, art, and baking. Well, Siddhika is so happy that Zara is connecting to her roots through this and helping us behind the screens. And in the second half, we'll hear from three young adult literature writers, Tanuja Desai-Hidier, Shiba Kareem, and Nisha Sharma. And this panel will be moderated by Ishita Suri. Ishita is a high schooler from Seattle and loves reading, and we are so glad to have her with us today. Now, over to Zara. Zara?
Hi, as you know, my name is Zahra, and I'm a sixth grader at Northshore Middle School, and today I'm happy to be talking to the two amazing authors, Ruxana Khan and Meera Sriram. We'll be discussing the wonderfully written and beautifully illustrated books, Big Red Lollipop by Ruxana Khan and The Yellow Suitcase and Gift for Amma by Meera Sriram. I hope you all are as excited as I am to hear about these authors. Okay. Meera Sriram grew up in India and moved to the US in 1999. An electrical engineer in the past, she now enjoys writing for children, leading early literacy initiatives, and advocating for diverse bookshelves. Meera is the author of picture books, The Yellow Suitcase, and Gift for Amma, and the upcoming title Between Two Worlds. She has also co-authored several kids' books in India. Meera believes in the transformative power of stories and likes to write about people, places, and experiences less visible in children's literature. Ruxana Khan is an award-winning author and storyteller. She was born in Lahore, Pakistan, and immigrated to Canada at the age of 3. Growing up, she was ruthlessly bullied, so she turned to books in order to cope. When a grade 8 teacher told her she was a writer, she thought the idea was crazy. Writers were white people from England and America. To be sensible, she became a biological chemical technician. When she couldn't get a decent job, she decided to be unsensible and become a writer. It took 8 years to get her first book published. Now she has 13 books published, one of which was chosen by the New York Public Library as one of the 100 greatest children's books in the last 100 years. She's been featured on television, radio, and at conferences and festivals around the world. She lives in Toronto with her husband and family. Yeah. Okay. I would like to begin our conversation by asking questions to both of you. So I'll ask one question and then you guys can take turns answering that same question. So my first question is, what inspired you to become a children's author?
You want to go first, Mira?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Roxana. Hi, Zara. Thank you so much for being here, so prepared. It's a joy to be talking to you today. And thank you, Tasveer, for having me and for this amazing platform and for celebrating South Asian stories, South Asian representation, and creators. So, Zara, I grew up in India and I moved to the US as an adult. And I was an electrical engineer before I started writing. But I had my kids. And then I started reading board books and picture books to my daughter. The thing is, growing up, I never had access to picture books. We had a very tiny library where I read a few British classics and some folk tales, in India, set in India. And in those books that I read, I never saw my life represented in any way. So they were either foreign characters to me, or they were set in the forest or jungles, and I couldn't really connect with any of the stories. So fast forward, and I'm here reading board books and picture books to my kids, and it was just so frustrating and shocking to see that my kids were pretty much going through the same thing. They were reading stories in which they didn't see themselves, like characters that looked like them, or their experiences being raised by parents who had moved from India to the US. So obviously we have family and friends in India. We have a great community here in California. We have certain experiences that are unique because we are growing up and living, because they were growing up and we were living across two cultures. We were celebrating certain holidays that weren't, celebrated by the dominant culture here. So because of this, we had certain experiences that were unique to us and certain families like us. And we never saw them in the stories. So our kids never saw characters like themselves, experiences like themselves within the pages of the book they were reading. So I started blogging about books, what we call as diverse books these days. But when I was blogging, we used to call them multicultural books, and that had immigrant experiences, and they had people of color, children of color in the pages. And I started blogging about them so parents who were on the same boat like me could use them to read to their children. And at some point, I decided, why not I tell these stories myself? And that was the inspiration to start writing and switch careers.
Well, with me, stories literally saved my life. It got so bad in the little town that I was being bullied in that I really turned to books, because when I was reading books, I could be someone else and I could be somewhere else. I could escape my pretty miserable life. I had a really horrible childhood. So I used books for escape. And when I was growing up, I think that teacher was absolutely right. I am a writer. I think the way that I process the world and what I see is through words and through my writing. A lot of the time I write to understand something. In Big Red Lollipop, you were mentioning Big Red Lollipop. In Big Red Lollipop, I actually wrote this to atone. When I was growing up, I was I was a second daughter. I was the second child. And my older sister, my parents put a lot of pressure on us. We emigrated to Canada in 1965. So my father put a lot of pressure on my older sister. We were supposed to be perfect. When my older sister, when I would come home with a test, and if we got 98%, my father would say, well, what happened to the other 2%? So we were always striving to be excellent. Now, what happened was when I was about 3 or 4, something like that, we had just arrived in Canada. My older sister was in grade 1, and she was invited to a birthday party. And we didn't know what they were because we never did that in Pakistan. So she was invited to this birthday party. And when I heard there was going to be games and toys, cake and ice cream, I started screaming, I want to go too. Now, my mom didn't know, like in Pakistan, if you invited one kid, you invite the whole family. So so when I started screaming, she said, well, to my older sister, she said, well, you have to take your younger sister. And my sister Bushra, she said, no, but they don't do that here. Now, all this stuff that happened in the story really happened except for one thing. Everything that happened in the story except for one thing. And what I did was, when I grew up, this story actually was just a vignette in another story I'd written. It was a young adult novel, my first young adult novel, because I have 13 books that range from picture books all the way to young adult novels. And I just mentioned this story in passing, where I forced my sister to take me with her to the birthday party. And at the birthday party, I behaved horribly. Okay, I had to win all the games because I was just the youngest. And when I fell down during musical chairs, I cried like a baby. And when we were going home, the lady gave us loot bags, and in our loot bags there was a big red lollipop. Now, I ate mine on the way home. My sister saved hers for later. The next morning, guess who woke up first? I woke up first, and I tried not to eat it, but I couldn't help it. I just broke off a little piece and the whole thing shattered. And then slowly, I ate little pieces, and then till there was only a triangle left. Now, I left the triangle for her. I was very proud of myself. I thought, good girl, you didn't eat the triangle. Technically, it's still a lollipop. And I went and sat down to watch cartoons. And I felt very proud of myself. Nobody ever gives me credit for not eating the triangle too. Okay. I mean, I was only 3 years old, but I didn't eat the triangle too. If I had, it wouldn't be a story. Anyways, so my sister woke up. She was furious. I went to hide. And when my mom came, I hid behind her because she was trying to kill me. And I hid behind my mom, and she said, what's going on here? And I said, Bushra's trying to kill me. She's trying to hit me. And my mom turned to her and she said, for shit, are you trying to hit your little sister? And Bushra said, she ate my lollipop, the greedy thing, she ate it. And my mom said, for shame, it's just a lollipop. And I got away with it. Now, fast forward many years, there was like, and the thing is, I had told that part of the story to a bunch of different, because I'm a storyteller too. So I told that to a bunch of different audiences. And I noticed how all the people in the audience, from the 2-year-olds all the way to the adults and the grandparents, all laughed. Everybody could relate to this story. It was a universal story. So, but then I thought I need an ending because it's not proper to just end it at that. And so then what happened, I remembered that years later, I had been invited to a birthday party, and my sister, Bushra, had actually stepped in because I also have a younger sister. And when I came home waving the invitation, my baby sister, she started screaming, I want to go too. And I thought, no, I can't, because my older sister had been like, the kids at school, they didn't want to invite her anymore because I was going to come along. So I begged and pleaded, but my mom wouldn't listen. And Bushra stepped forward and she told my mother, don't make me have to take her. And so I didn't have to take my baby sister. And I thought that is a perfect ending. So what I did was I put it all together and it became Big Red Lollipop. It took me 10 years to write this story. Out of all my stories, it's taken me the longest time. But in writing it, first I was telling it from my version of the story. And then my editor, she said, why don't you let the older sister tell the story because she's a more sympathetic character. So I rewrote the story in 15 minutes. For 10 years, I've been telling it from my version of events. I rewrote the story in 15 minutes, and I've been trying to get it published. Nobody would take it. And then I rewrote the story as my older sister. So this is my older sister on the cover, not me. I'm actually the bad guy in the story. And that became published, and it won the Charlotte Zolotow Award and the Golden Kite, and it was chosen by the New York Public Library as one of the 100 greatest children's books in the last 100 years. So that's the inspiration for that story. That's why I became an author. It's how I process the world.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know there was like so much story behind just one story. So also I wanted to know when you guys started writing and like how long have you been writing?
So I actually quit my job, my electrical engineering job in 2008 or 9 maybe. And I shifted gears to children's literature. But like I said, I was blogging. I was a blogger of picture books and middle grade for about 5 years. And during this time, I was also writing stories for children in India, for publishers in India. I was co-authoring a few books that were mostly creative nonfiction, and the mission was exactly the same. It was to show that there are people and wildlife and communities within India that are not represented in the books. So my friend, my co-blogger, and I were writing picture books for children in India for a few years. And that was between 2009 and 2013 when we had 4 books come out. And then when I decided that I wanted to tell our stories here in the US, I started writing in 2015. So it's been like 5 years, I guess, writing picture books for kids here. And and I have 2 books out and 2 more coming out. And hopefully I'll have more stories to tell.
I've been writing for 31 years. I started when my twin daughters were 2 years old. And when I started, one of the things that got me going, this was a long time ago, there was this guy named Salman Rushdie who had written this book that made a lot of people angry, a lot of Muslims very angry. And what happened was, at this point, I was already dreaming of being an author, but I thought I had to write stories about regular kids like Bobby and Sally and Joe. I actually didn't start at the beginning writing stories about my culture because I didn't think that was marketable, because I've been writing for so long. And so what happened was, all this stuff was happening, and it made us Muslims look really crazy. And I thought, what? I said to my husband, I said, why don't we Muslims write our own stories to show where we're coming from, why the way we think, that we're not crazy, that we have a perspective, and we have stories to tell. And I said, look at when something like this happens, they just kind of slap us around and we look crazy. We should have our own stories. And my husband said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I can't, because at that point I was just like a housewife and mother. And my husband said nobody else was doing it. At that time, there were very few diverse authors. So I thought, okay, you know what, let me try this. And I started with children's books because they really did save my life. So I started taking courses, and it took 8 years to get my first book published. But after 9 years of trying, all of a sudden I had 5 books under contract. And then I had a lull. And then I came back, and then I wrote all different kinds of stories. The stories that I write, it depends on the genre, how to tell the story. Okay, I'm always exploring new ways of telling stories, and I look to see what's not being said. I actually look at the gaps in terms of the market. Where are we failing children? Where are we failing the community? If other people are writing certain stories, I don't go there. I let them write those stories. I try to write the stories that are not being told. So that's a lot of the time what I do, and how I and it's been I've been published now since 1998, which is 22 years. And over those 22 years, I have like the 13 books published, but I've been writing for 31 years.
Okay, one just off the top of my head, I wanted to know, how long does it usually take to write each book?
Oh, do you really want to know that, Zara? Okay. It takes a very long time. And you know, the funny thing, you would think that there are so few words in a picture book. Like the Yellow Suitcase has about 600 words, and the Gift for Amma has like even less, probably at 250 words. But it actually took me over a year to write one manuscript. And this is just, I'm talking about the draft. So the first time you have an idea, you let it simmer in your head. And then after a while, you start like, playing around with it. You have a first draft, but you know that it doesn't read that well. You know, there are going to be things that, readers won't understand. Maybe the language is not that great. And then you work on the draft for a few months, and then you take it to your friends who are also writing picture books like you. They're called critique partners. And then you get it revised. They tell you what changes to make. So that happens for a few more months, or sometimes even many, many months. And then you'll kind of know when it reads really well, and people start telling you like, oh, this is a great story. Oh, I love it. I connect with it. And then it's in a good place. It's in good shape. Then comes the process of actually sending it out to people in the publishing industry to actually start making it as a book. So that takes a very long time. Just the writing, I would say for Yellow Suitcase, I wrote it in 2016, and the book got picked up in 2018, and it came out in 2019. So about the entire lifespan of a book, from like the first idea or draft to the book coming out, could be anywhere from like 2 years to 5-6 years, at least in my case. And the same thing for Gift for Amma. It took me about a year to write the story like completely and send it out. And it took another 2 years for the book to come out. Yeah, so a lot of patience, a lot of waiting, a lot of advice from other writers to make it better. And then obviously when the book comes out, you're just so incredibly happy and grateful, right? The feeling is so good.
Yeah, I would say it depends on the book. Like, for example, Big Red Lollipop, I already mentioned, it took me like 10 years and 15 minutes to write the story. So for 10 years, I was telling it from the wrong perspective. Well, not the wrong perspective, but a different perspective. I was doing it from my point of view. And then I changed it and I wrote it from my sister's point of view. And then that became published. But just to give you an example, to give you an idea, this is my young adult novel, one of my young adult novels called Wanting More, based on a true story. And this story took me about 5 months to write. The first draft poured right out of me, and it took only about 5 months to write. And one of my other picture books, The Roses in My Carpets, 4 years. Okay, it's less than 1,000 words, but it took me actually 4 years to write this story. So the shorter stories often take longer because every single word counts. And to be able to write a whole story arc within a very short number of words, it's really difficult. Whereas if you have a novel, you have more room to let the characters flow, to do the characterization, to do the story, the plot, and everything to make it flow. So yeah, a lot of the time, the shorter stories take longer. Although sometimes, like I have one book called Silly Chicken, and that one I got the idea in one day. It's about a girl who's jealous of her mother's pet chicken, and it's set in Pakistan. Unfortunately, that one is out of print. That one came out, I think, in 2003 or 2004, but it's out of print now. So I don't really usually mention that. But sometimes you get a gift and the story just kind of falls in your lap. You write it and it goes out and it gets published. Okay, sometimes that happens, very rarely. But normally, even my short stories, like for example, King for a Day, that one probably took, well, this is actually the second version of this book. It took about 6-7 months to write the story. And this story is about Basant. It's about the kite festival in Pakistan.
Okay, I did not know that it took that long, because usually when I write a story for class or something, it usually takes like 1 month, and it takes like a day to just draw the cover.
Yeah, but you're not trying to get someone to buy it. Okay.
Yeah.
And if somebody's trying to buy something, they want their money's worth, right? It has to be better than basically a lot of stuff out there. And it has to be marketable. So that's why you have to raise your writing to a higher level when you're trying to get it published. But when you're doing it as a school assignment, yeah, of course, a month would be great. A month would be perfect.
But that's how I started, Zara. That's how long it took for me to write when I was your age. And then as you grow older, you realize there are other ways of telling the same story, more juicier words to use in a story, maybe, right? So then you start working on it even more, caring for it even more until it becomes a book. But you that's a good start. That's where I was when I was your age.
Another question I have is, this is something that I find kind of hard, is how do you come up with intriguing story titles?
That's a good question. I know. I think with titles, some of them just click naturally. Like, it's like the title is the first thing to come in your head. Oh, I want to write a story about a suitcase, for example, right? So it's like how I was picturing how my daughter like our family carried this suitcase of gifts back and forth, and it just stuck, and the image just stuck in my head, and I knew that the title would have a suitcase in it. So when I'm talking about the yellow suitcase, so sometimes it's like the title is the first thing, and it just sticks and it grows on everyone, like even editors or people who read it, it feels very natural and it stays. But sometimes it changes. So the yellow suitcase, because it's a story about a girl who loses her grandmother, it's a little bit of it's a grief story, right? She's sad, she misses her grandmother. So I somehow had this association of a blue suitcase because it's blue, right? Blue sometimes has this association of being sad, you're feeling blue. So it was called the blue suitcase when I started writing it. But like I said, it took me many, many months to write the story. And somehow towards the end, there was this hope at the end of the story, right? And the girl starts off being sad, but eventually she starts celebrating her grandmother with, she has all these cherished memories that she's talking about. So somehow it transitioned into the yellow suitcase. So which worked perfectly because you don't want it to be all sad and depressing. You want it to be hopeful at the end. And yellow seemed to bring that ray of hope in the story, that sunshine that's also associated with India for me personally. So it became the yellow suitcase. In the case of A Gift for Amma, it was originally called Market Day in India, or Market Day, I guess, because I was just literally talking about a market day in India. But when the story was done, the story was sold, I worked with my editor, the book was about to come out. It was going to go into printing. And that's when my editor and I started brainstorming a more catchy title. And the story is about a girl wandering the markets, trying to pick out a gift for her mother. So we just exchanged emails, brainstormed together. She would send me a few titles. I sent her a few titles. And then we took a vote. Like I asked my family and she asked her co-workers. And then it looks like everyone liked A Gift for Amma. And then we had the Market Day in India, as the subtitle. So it depends. So it depends on the process. Sometimes it just comes naturally and it's the first thing to come out of you and it stays. And sometimes you have to pick a different one along the way, depending on what fits the story well. So yeah, it's actually a fun thing. I love picking the title and finding out what's the final title that goes on the cover of the book. So.
That's really interesting. With me, I always hate picking the title because my story is never just about the title. With Big Red Lollipop was obvious though. It was a really good title because it's not really about the lollipop. It's really about the relationship between the two sisters. And it's about greed and it's about temptation. But the big red lollipop is like the catalyst for the story. Because when I eat most of my sister's lollipop, that instigates the story. Okay. So it was an obvious good choice. And plus, who doesn't like big red lollipops, right? I mean, it just is so delectable and juicy and, you know, like tempting, you know. So Big Red Lollipop was the perfect title for that. Let me, King for a Day, on the other hand, the title before I had King of the Skies, because it's about the kite festival. It's actually about a boy who's disabled, and he is king for a day. Like, he's so good at fighting with kites that he actually is king for a day. So that title was also something I thought that would really appeal, especially to little boys, because this is a boy's story. He's a really good king. He shares his power with his brother and sister. He's just got all of the best qualities of a king. Now, but I want to show you one of the titles that I'm the most proud of that was pretty tough to come up with. And that was the title for Wanting More. Now, Wanting More is the title. It's misspelled. It's M-O-R. But that's not, it's not a spelling mistake, because this story is set in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, in Pashto, the word for mother is more. And it's a story about a girl whose mother dies during the war. Her father gets remarried. The stepmother doesn't want her. So the father takes her to the marketplace and he leaves her there. And she ended up in an orphanage that I sponsored with the money from this book, The Roses in My Carpets. This one is about a refugee foster child. Now, The Roses in My Carpets is a title that doesn't actually have it doesn't really mean much to people. But if you actually read the book, you understand that the carpet that he creates, that he's learning how to weave, represents so much in his life. So with this one, when I was calling it Wanting More, when she has nothing. This little girl, she's got nothing, and her father's going to abandon her in a marketplace. And she wants her mother more, M-O-R, but she also wants M-O-R-E. She wants more because she has nothing. So it became the perfect title for it. One day I was just thinking, I thought, well, what can I call it? What can I call it? And I thought, Wanting More, because it's obviously about her wanting her mother, because her mother was the only one who cherished her. Her father was useless, but she also wants more. She has nothing. So that's why it became the title for Wanting More. Yeah. So titles are hard. You have to basically sum up the word, the whole book, sorry, in just a few words, which is really hard.
I also have another question that is.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, my other question is, I think last question for both of you is, what kind of books did you guys read while growing up, or like, what were your favorites?
Do you want to take this one, Roxana, first?
Yeah, sure. My all-time favorite is the book called The Lord of the Rings. I love The Lord of the Rings because it's a complicated story. But in this story, and it's a fantasy, it has magic in it, but the most important characters are actually the least magical. They're ordinary people, kind of, they're hobbits, and they're the most important, they're the most interesting characters. There was another story that I loved called Jane Eyre, which was written about more than 100 years ago by Charlotte Bronte. And I kept reading about it in other books that I was reading. It's like, I'm reading all these books and they keep mentioning Jane Eyre. I thought, well, let me try this out. So I read the book, and as soon as I started reading it, I identified so much with Jane Eyre, this girl who felt ugly and who felt unwanted and who was completely abused and bullied by the people around her. And I just loved it. Then there was another book called Mara, Daughter of the Nile. Oh, it's a spy thriller set in ancient Egypt during the reign of Hatshepsut and Thutmose. And it was like intrigue, and Mara is like, oh, It is such an exciting story, and it's written by a woman named Eloise Jarvis McGrath. That book I was obsessed with, and I almost stole it from the library. I didn't know when I was growing up. I was poor, so I didn't know you could actually buy books. I thought you could only get them from the library, so I kept it home under my. I told the librarian I'd lost it, or I'd already returned it, and I kept it for about a month, and then my conscience got the better of me, and I returned it. And when I went back to see if I could take the book out again, it was gone because it was so tattered because of all the reading it had. I guess she had thrown it out. And when I grew up, I found it in a bookstore and I bought 5 copies and I gave it to my kids and I gave it to one of my nieces and she loved it too. Like everybody has loved this book, Mara, Daughter of the Nile. Another one I love is called Watership Down. It's actually a very gruesome story about rabbits. And the title is the worst title. We were just talking about titles. Watership Down makes you think that it's about a battleship or something like that, like a sea battle. It's not. A down in England is like a kind of a big hill, and it somehow it was a real place called Watership Down, it's just the stupidest title. But the book is fantastic. It's about leadership. And I've read that book probably as many times as I've read The Lord of the Rings. It is incredible. The characterization and the story itself is fantastic. And it actually combines mythology of rabbits. Like he creates this whole mythology in there, and there's a reason for it. Everything comes together in this beautiful story called Watership Down. It has traumatized some people, but me, I love that story. I've read it so many times and I keep going back to it. But those are just some of the books I love. There are so many. On my website, I made a whole list of my favorite books.
Yeah, that was great, Roxana. I know. I had a hard time coming up with one title or even a few titles. But like I said, I wasn't reading until I didn't have books to read like that we would all probably know, popular ones, until I was in middle school. And that's when I had access to my school library and I started reading. I used to get lost in the works of British authors like Charles Dickens and Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. I had these abridged versions. They were series of the same author, the mysteries, the detective, the Sherlock Holmes and the novels, the series. And same thing with Charles Dickens. I remember reading A Tale of Two Cities over and over again. So, and then I started borrowing more detective novels like the American Nancy Drew. You probably heard of that. Hardy Boys, Secret Seven, all of those. Like pretty much that was my diet in like middle school. But now, and then as I grew older, I got introduced to more authors that were born and raised in India. Like there was a person called R.K. Narayanan, and he had many short stories that were set in the place that I grew up in. So I was able to connect with that. And I started reading books by Anita Desai, Khushwant Singh. So these were authors. When I was in college, I got introduced to authors that were also from India. But now, when I started reading picture books, the real picture book, I have so many favorites. I like Jacqueline Woodson. Do you know Jacqueline Woodson? She has many books. I love all her books. She writes picture books. She writes middle grade. She writes YA, and I read any book that comes out. I pre-order them and I read them. I like The Other Side, The Day We Begin. So these are some of the books by Jacqueline Woodson that I like. I also like Alan Say. He's another picture book writer, and he talks about life between two countries, just like how I like to write about India and the US. He talks about his roots in Japan and in the US. And I also like, Patricia Polocco. She is an amazing storyteller. And her stories are just long and juicy, and somehow it takes me back to my childhood. So I love Patricia.
I have a Jacqueline Woodson story. Are you finished? Sorry. Are you finished, Mira? Yeah, I have a Jacqueline Woodson story. When Big Red Lollipop was coming out, The artist, Sophie Blackall, she's famous. She's won the Caldecott twice. She was actually doing Pecan Pie Baby for Jacqueline Woodson at the time. So Jacqueline Woodson got what's called galleys of Big Red Lollipop. And out of the blue, she emailed me one day. Oh, she emailed me one day saying how her 2-year-old son, he was only 2 years old at the time. He's like a teenager now, but because it came out in 2010, her 2-year-old son had asked me, she wanted to tell me how much she loved Big Red Lollipop because her 2-year-old son, for his birthday, he wanted to be able to read the galley of Big Red Lollipop twice that day. And when I got her email, I thought, you're the Jacqueline Woodson. And I was just like freaking out because I admired her work. I loved The Other Side as well. It is so subtle. And it's about racism and everything. And it's about a fence and about these kids that play on that fence as if they're playing between two worlds. It's such a beautiful book called The Other Side, and it's illustrated by E.B. White. And so I was a fan of Jacqueline Woodson, and she sent me that email. We've been friends ever since. Yeah, sorry, I'm shamelessly name dropping, but you reminded me of that story, and I just had to say.
That's a great story. Yeah, I would be freaking out too. If she my book. Yeah.
Okay, now I think that I got sent some questions from the audience. So I'll just read those to you. So Siddhi says, Mira and Roxana, how difficult was it for you to get a publisher to tell your story?
Should I go, Roxana?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, at least in my case, because my debut was a grief story. And it's not very common for your first book that comes out to be talking about death and loss and immigration and all of that. So, but I'm glad I was persistent. So I send it out. So I'm not sure if you know that, like, you can't really send out your story directly to a publisher these days. They don't accept unsolicited submissions. So mostly there are a few that do that, but you also submit to agents to represent your literary work. So I was sending them out, and the feedback that I kept getting for almost a year was, this is great. I completely connect with this. It was so moving. It's so poignant. However, we're not sure if we can sell this. It's sad, all of those things. So for me, at least, because it was a grief story and I was so adamant about publishing that story or putting that story out because I believed in how important it was, it was hard to have people tell me that it's great, I connect with it, but yet it's not something that we publish. It's not something that we can sell very easily. It's not something that we can market. So I still find it, I think things are changing a little bit now. At least in the past year, I see many grief stories coming out, which is great. So that was hard. With Market Day, I had a different kind of challenge. People again were like, "Oh, this is great. It's a fresh take on colors," and because it is a colors book fundamentally. But in the end, it was like, could you set it somewhere in a suburb in the US so children can connect? I'm like, I want to take them to India. I want them to travel to India through the book. And I don't want the purpose, the heart of the book lies in opening this window into a market in India. So it's not going to be the same to set it in the US in a suburb or like a Desi store, so to speak. So it's not the same. So I had a hard time convincing or taking the rejections from publishers that said that, "Oh, we like it, but could you set it in a different place?" So that was a challenge. So it's hard, but if you believe in the importance of your own work, I think it eventually comes across, and there's someone who can always believe it for the same reasons that you want it out, and then the book comes out.
This is a very good question. How hard was it to get a publisher? It's extremely hard. When I first started, I was submitting to small publishers and trying to get my foot in the door. I was pulled from something called a slush pile. The slush pile is the pile of stories that are sent to publishers where there might be one or two in 5,000 that they think, okay, we can publish this one. So the rejection is always part of being an author. And if you can't stand rejection, then it's not a good idea to try to become an author, because at every point you're going to be rejected. There's going to be doors that slam in your face. That's part of the process, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your story, you're trying to take your words, and you're trying to make money with it. And the thing is, people have to think, okay, first of all, is it a good story? Is it something I want to send out into the world? Does it have something good to offer? Well, people pay money for this. That's the first thing. Second, yeah, is it marketable? Because it might be a fantastic story, but the timing might be wrong. People don't want to hear it, or they don't want to know about this. Because when I was growing up, nobody was really even doing multicultural books. It was very, very rare that you would find it. Now it's become more of a, I wouldn't say a fad, or I would say more of a trend, because people are trying to catch up for all the stories we've needed to be able to tell, because the world is very diverse. So we need to show that diversity with the stories that we tell. It can't just all be the same kind of people. So there's so many different factors involved. And what I tell anybody who's trying to get published is that rejection is part of the process. You have to face rejection. If you are getting rejected, and there are going to be times when you do get rejected, and because I've been writing for so long, 31 years now, there have been lulls. There has been times when I get like a whole bunch of stuff published, and then years when everything that I get, everything I try is going to get rejected. So you have to pass through that rejection, and the times that I'm getting rejected are actually just as important as the time that I'm not, because the time that I'm getting rejected means that I'm trying new things. Authors have to be courageous enough to try and fail at new stuff, because art is something that pushes the limits. So you have to really be courageous, and you have to try. You have to sometimes fail, and when you fail, you think, okay, this didn't work, but there's something in there that I'm trying to say, and it can work. And it's about changing the angle, changing the way you're telling the story to make it work. So that's what you have to do, and it's a process. So and the more you get rejected, the better you actually get, because you're going to push yourself, you're going to try it harder, you're going to dig deeper and pull out something that's better. So don't look at rejection and all of this competition as something that's negative. It's actually good for everybody. So it actually raises everybody higher, so that we work better, and we tell a more interesting story, not the first story that comes to our imagination.
Okay, so one last question and then we'll wrap up. So Husna says, how do you put adult problems or complex feelings in a way that kids can easily understand and doesn't scare them?
That's a very, very great question. Appreciate it. It is hard. It is very hard. Personally, what helps me is that kids are not completely shielded from what's going on, whether it's an adult problem or a kid problem. Say, if someone dies in the family, if I don't talk to my kids, it's going to be harder for them. If there's a political event going on around, I can't completely shield them from that. They're going to hear it on the radio, in the car, maybe. They're going to hear their friends talk about it in the playground. So every topic, be it gun violence, racism, incarceration, death, a terminal illness, anything is part of everyone's life. It's part of the world. It's part of the natural cycle of life, right? It's happening around us. So we can't really run away from it or turn away from it. So kids are part of it. They overhear conversations that adults are having. They watch TV. They talk about the news too. So I believe that instead of kids cooking up stories in their own head, assuming things, propagating misinformation, holding on to wrong facts. It's better for me to uh, talk in a book or through a book to kids the same way that I would talk to my own kids, or I would have liked for my parents to have talked to me. So I just put myself in the shoes of a child and see how I would want a child to process it, right? So because I believe that it is important to talk about all difficult, complex issues that's happening around us in books, it just drives me to find the right words. So I just have to simplify the language. Also, I think keep it a little bit hopeful, because for just obvious reasons, a child who's reading a book that's just completely sad and hard to understand and depressing might not carry on reading and might not stick with it, the story. So just for those storytelling purposes, I might make it a little bit more contextually relevant for children. The scene or the setting might be something that they have probably experienced in their life, and then I choose words that are also simpler to understand, and present the story in a way that they can also connect. They must have seen it, they must have experienced it, they must have had a neighbor go through something, a friend. So when I visit schools and classrooms with the yellow suitcase, which is a death story, it really opens up such a beautiful conversation in the classroom. I always have kids raising their hands and telling me, I remember the day when my mom came to me and told me about the cancer that took away my great grandmother or my grandmother. I remember the day my dog died. So everyone goes through the same problems, irrespective of adults or kids. And I write words, the setting, and the context to tell the story.
I think that's an excellent answer. What you have to remember too, because what I've been told also from editors is that it actually takes an adult to write a children's book, because we have been children, and because we've grown up. As we grow and as we read more, we have access to more language and more understanding than a child does. So when I'm writing a story, I actually find it very easy to put myself into a child's perspective. What is hard is that I have to stay within that child's perspective, that I can't go outside of it. And sometimes, like a lot of the time, I will write something through first person point of view, which means it's like the person saying, I did this, I did that. I mean, Wanting More is about an 11-year-old girl, written from a first person point of view. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It can be very claustrophobic. It means that you have to focus only on what the character knows and what they experience and what they see. And as an adult, we can actually see the perspective around them, that, hey, they should not be so hard on themselves for this, because they're doing the best they can. When I talk about with Big Red Lollipop, the characters are children, but the story involves their feelings of even navigating a new society where the mother doesn't understand the rules. So there's other layers underneath it. And as an adult, we have access to every single layer, but it's a good idea to leave it in your subconscious and just let it flow through the story, but tell the story with a mind to the different layers underneath it. Like what Mira was saying, that all children, they are exposed to every single emotion. It's just through their perspective. So what you have to do when you're writing for children is respect that perspective. Respect their feelings, respect what they're going through, because a child wants to read about their problems, their issues, their experiences. They don't want it translated through an adult perspective, okay? Because they get enough of that. They really want it through their perspective. So you tell the story through their perspective, being honest, being respectful, and really telling it the way that it is. And if you do that accurately, then children, even adults who have been children, they will recognize the truth of what you're writing, and they will see that, yeah, this makes sense. It's consistent with a child's perspective, and it's their truth.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your answers. I think they taught me a lot because there are many things that I had no idea about. And yeah.
So much. I love the question on the title particularly because I love titles and I always wonder what the authors were thinking when they came up with the title.
Oh, I
So
hate titles.
thanks for all those questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Zahra is saying thank you so much for all your questions. They were really good. And thank you for the people online who submitted your questions. They were some pretty good, excellent questions. Thank you.
Agree. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And thanks to Tasveer for all the behind the scene work. I know
Thank you.
it took a lot of effort and hard work to pull this together. So this was great.
Yeah, thank you to Tasveer especially for putting together this festival.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Zara, Meera, Sriram, and Ruxana Khan for this amazing panel. This was our first time having a children's panel, and we look forward to hosting more of these in the future. And maybe we will get to see you all in person too. So we will take a quick break for 5 minutes now, and we'll join you back on the same video right here with part 2 of this panel with some young adult literature writers. So stay tuned. Go get some tea, go get your bathroom breaks if you need to, and then be right back on this video, and we'll just be waiting here for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see.
Okay, awesome. So we are back on, and now we're moving on to the next part of our panel, the young adult literature. We have authors Tanuja Desai Hidir, Sheba Kareem, and Nisha Sharma, and moderator Ishita Suri. Ishita is a high schooler living in Seattle who loves reading, and we met her through another youth program that we were doing for Tasveer Youth Collective, and we're so glad to have her here to moderate this panel. Ishita, the stage is all yours. Take it away.
Hi, Roshni. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you. I entered a little bit late on the last panel because of some technical difficulties, but hearing Mira and hearing Ruxana and Zara talk about literature, I didn't know there were so many facets to something as seemingly simple as children literature, and so that was very, very fascinating. Thank you for that. But I am so excited to move on to a little bit of youth, adult or young adult literature. And thank you for being here, Tanuja, Sheba, and Nisha. I have met you all through your words so far, but I have yet to meet you in person. So let's get started. I guess, we can dive into the first question right away. So the first question that I have for all three of you is, why do you choose to express your heritage through young adult literature?
Would you like, everyone's being very polite.
I can start.
Would you like to go first?
I know. I'll go. Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ishita, for hosting. I think this is common with a lot of young adult writers, is that a lot of us write the stories that we wish that we had when we were growing up. And so initially, my first young adult novel was literally the story I wish I had growing up, because when I was younger, growing up, almost all the literature I read, coming of age stories, were all centered on white protagonists. So my initial spark in writing Skunk Girl, which was my first book, was, this is the book I was longing for, I was craving for when I was young. And now as I've continued on, now I'm exploring, other avenues, but always within sort of that same realm of identity and coming of age.
I think I'm pretty much the same way. Hi, everyone. I wanted to write my so-called Bollywood life. I generally refer to it as a love letter to my younger self. It's the book that I wrote for who I wish I always could have been and who I wish that I was, which is a strong, resilient, always, optimistic, driving to her goals kind of person. I was pretty driven when I was younger, so there are still lots of pieces of me within the characters in the story. But I think that, the overall, my so-called Bollywood life was, there was so much in it that I wanted to see in stories in my youth, very much like Sheba had said. So, and that's why I represent myself in the stories that I write. And I'm a firm believer that South Asian culture is not monolithic, and there's a lot of there's often interpretations out there that South Asian culture should be represented a certain way, or it should be depicted a certain way. But in writing, I want to show that there's different narratives that are out there, and that's why I put myself and my characters, and I create the characters that I do in the stories that I write.
I think a similar answer as well. It's really to be able to choose my own heroes and decide who gets to move to the center of the page from the margins. And my background was similar in the sense when I was growing up, my parents were the first from both sides of the family to immigrate to the US. And they had a semi-scandalous out-of-caste love marriage, came to the US, and we were the first of our particular kind of brown in the Western Massachusetts town where I grew up. And growing up, there was pretty much nobody who looked like us on TV, in magazines, on the movie screen, on our street, and certainly not on our bookshelf. And I think a reason I wrote Born Confused, Bombay Blues, the character of Dimple Lala, a lot of me is in her as well, as sort of what you were saying, Nisha and Shiba, was to fill that hole on my childhood bookshelf with a story filled with, heroes who were a lot more like the ones in my own home, and then who kind of honored the South Asian community I met later on in New York. And part of what I wanted to do was revise that term ABCD, for which this panel is partly named. That was a term I hadn't heard until I got to college, and I heard it for the first time there from friends who had actually, been born and raised in Pakistan and in India. And I remember when I heard the term, it was very exciting because I didn't know there was a word for us. But at the same time, it wasn't that exciting because it was, because it was American Born Confused They See, and it felt a bit like, that's amazing, there's a name for us. But the afterthought was sort of, but shouldn't we be naming ourselves and deciding what that name is? And there's a whole alphabet. There's actually 2 alphabets, like full alphabets all the way to Z, with this, starting with the ABCD moniker. And later, as I learned what the full alphabets were, I can tell you what they are actually. I think I have that one right here, have them here. American Born Confused They See, emigrated from Gujarat, house in Jersey, keeping lots of motels, named Om Karnath Patel, quickly reaching success through underhanded, vicious ways, xenophobic yet zestful. And then there's a second alphabet. Again, I didn't write these alphabets, they were just out there. American Born Confused They See, emigrated from Gujarat, house in Jersey, kids learning medicine, now owning property, quite reasonable salary, 2 uncles visiting, white xenophobic yet zestful. So yeah, so it felt like it was maybe time to do a revamping of that.
Yes. No, that's the first time I've heard the whole alphabet used to describe us. That was ridiculous. But Tanuja and Shiba and Nisha, I agree with so much of what you're saying. Tanuja, I am also, my parents were the first to immigrate to America, and I've just been growing up here. I was born in India, but I've been growing up here. And again, I agree with that lack of representation. I too have the desire and the want to be represented. And when I read literature like this, where I see so much of myself in these characters and so many relatable themes, it just makes my heart very, very happy to know that there are others like me out there and that I am being represented and seen. And before we go any further, I apologize, I forgot to do this, but I'd love to hear, if you have a few sentences to introduce yourselves to the rest of our audience, that would be great.
I'll go again. So hi everyone, I'm Shiba Kareem. I am a young adult author, obviously. My first book was Skunk Girls, published in 2009, followed up by That Thing We Call a Heart. And Mariam Sharma Hits the Road, which was my last book. And then my next book is out in May, and it's called The Marvelous Mirza Girls. And it's loosely inspired by the show Gilmore Girls, and it's mostly set in New Delhi.
Tanuja, why don't you go next?
Okay. So my name's Tanuja Desai Idie. I'm calling in from Maine. So we just moved back to the US at the end of 2017 and to Maine in early 2018 after 17 years in London. But I grew up in Western Massachusetts with a little bit of Bombay mixed in. But mostly Massachusetts and then New York. My first novel is called Born Confused, and I've seen people doing this, so I have them today, which I don't normally have them here. This is the first time it came out. It was like this. The question mark got a little smaller, I noticed, when they reissued it later. So maybe that's progress. And the sequel is Bombay Blues, and that's the same set of characters, mostly all in Bombay. And I also do music, so I've made a couple of albums of sort of soundtrack songs to accompany the books. This one is When We Were Twins, which that's my mom on the back of it. She's also in the book, her photograph. That goes with Bombay Blues. Born Confused, and this one, Bombay Spleen. These are songs based on Bombay Blues. And I'm working on the third in the Dimple Lala series, which is a more London, UK based part of her journey, and as well as another writing project that's similar themes of the other and safe spaces and the family you're born into and chosen family, with a different set of characters as well as songs to go with. And I have a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old who are, happily able to grow up now with much more of a richness of literature in terms of, representing our culture and other cultures as well. So that's been something lovely to see. So thank you for your work. Oh, I also need to say I am fans of these two writers. So I've read their work, beautiful, wonderful, fresh stuff, unifying themes. But, as Nisha was saying, we are no monolith and they tell very different stories, yet we are kindred, sister scribes as well. So that's very exciting. And thank you for your work. And thank you for moderating, Ishita.
I remember when I first read Born Confused, I immediately emailed Thanuja. Thanuja, I don't know if you remember, it was my first job out of college. I was working for a company, and I was talking to my mentor there, and she's like, oh, Thanuja and I grew up together in Massachusetts. And my mind was blown, because I remember Born Confused was the first time I saw an American-born South Asian. And then after that, I read Skunk Girl, and I was like, I was gone. I was like, this is what I'm like, because before that, I had been working for literary agents, doing remote reading. I had been working in publishing for quite some time in internship capacities before I'd gone to law school. And every time I would bring up the fact that I wanted to write about my own identity, in romance particularly, the response was, well, right now, there's not a lot of representation, so maybe you should consider having at least one of the characters being not diverse. And I hated that. I had gotten that from so many individuals in the publishing industry, and I hated that. So when Born Confused and Skunk Girl both hit the shelves, I was like, there is no way that I'm ever going back. There is no way. These people are opening doors for people like me, who I just came out 5 or 6 years after Thanuja and Shiva and a few others were really just starting to hit the scene. And so, I had dragged my heels at that point, and I said, I'm not changing any character in my story. I'm writing a love story between two brown people, and that's it. So my so-called Bollywood life came out in 2018. I had actually sold movie rights first, and then I ended up selling the book. And then in 2019, it came out in the UK. And and I write both adult romance and young adult romance. So I've been kind of every other year been writing adult and young adult. And so next year, my next young adult novel comes out called Radha and Jay's Recipe for Romance. And in it, there's a particular section where the heroine talks about how, the Desi experience, or South Asians, are like the spice tin. So we all kind of have a spice tin, or we've all been familiar with some sort of a spice tin, but our spices are different depending on where you go. And that's all, that's what I would like to write about. I would like to write characters and experiences where there's a spice tin, but it's just different spices and different experiences, depending on the region you're from or the area you're from. And I think that's so important, for all of us to continue to publish books about our experiences, so people can realize that. And, and salt is not the only spice. And that's why writing, my identity to me, continues to be important, why I'm so excited to continue to publish books like, Bollywood Life and Radha and Recipes. I just went on a tangent, but I felt like that was really important to say, because I saw a soapbox, I had to get on it, and that's why I went on a tangent.
No, thank you for going on that tangent. I think wherever a discussion blossoms, it's beautiful. And I agree, identity is, I'm at that phase. I'm a high school senior, and I'm at that phase where I'm still trying to figure out and pull bits and pieces from my community at school and bits and pieces from my community at home, and to see how it's panned out for you and the way you've expressed yourself through these novels. It's very, very encouraging, very, very motivating. Thank you, from all of the readers to all of you for doing this, for really shattering that glass ceiling and going out of your way to represent your own identity.
Thank you for reading, because it's a collaboration that couldn't happen without you. So equal gratitude your way, Ishita.
I have another question for you, for all of you. So, clearly we are living at this time where things have changed radically over, just a few months. And during this time of global upheaval, political upheaval, what does refuge mean to you? And how and where do you find refuge from the outside world?
All right.
I guess we can go in this order. Yeah. Refuge. It's interesting. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and so anyone who's been parenting during this pandemic, it's been really challenging and really exhausting, and not very easy to get writing done. But in some ways, it's also been a refuge. I think, my kids are young, and so even though they understand that the world has changed and you have to wear your mask, and especially my 6-year-old, she can't have the same play dates she used to have, et cetera, they still have their sense of childhood wonder. And so being with them and spending time with them, and listening to their questions about the world, and seeing them watch the flight of a butterfly and comment on it, that really has been a refuge for me, because it reminds me that there is so much wonder and beauty in this world, even as there's moments when you feel like it's falling apart.
Yeah, I agree. We actually now have a 3-generation household. So my husband and my 2 daughters and I moved back to the States to be closer to my parents, who are in their 82 and 84 now, actually. And we initially went to Massachusetts, where I grew up and where they were at the time. And then my brother, who's been in Maine for 20 years, was like, why don't you come check out Maine a little bit while you're figuring out what you're going to do now that you're back? And we fell in love with Maine very quickly. We're in southern Maine. We're in a town that has coastline. You can see the ocean. I've never had this experience before, being able to see the ocean at a drop of a hat. And for our girls who've never lived in the US, I mean, it's an interesting time to come back. If someone had told me we would be moving back when all of this was going on, that would have been hard to believe. But at the same time, it's been the best time to come back, because now we're all in the same town. We moved my parents in with us. We're about 5 minutes away from my brother, and we're quite quarantined, because generally it's safe to be, and also because they're 82 and 84. And it's been a real gift. I think the sense of relief at getting them to us in time, because they moved in with us at the end of March, which had been the plan before anyone was talking about a pandemic. To have them here, the relief has kind of counterbalanced a lot of the stress and dismay at everything that's been going on politically in the world, et cetera. And we've been able to have, at least one meal a day where we all sit around the table together. And we recently discovered, or not discovered, we moved boxes and boxes and boxes of slides from my parents' basement here when we moved their house and their things over here. And we've just found all these slides from some of them from my parents in the 60s in India, the 70s when we were growing up in Western Massachusetts. And so now we've been kind of rounding out the day by sitting down and screening these on the wall of kind of the kitchen living room area. And, to be able to go through those together and hear their anecdotes firsthand, and just be in the same room after, 17 years of being in a different country, now to not only be in the same country and state and town, but actually in the same house, has been a real blessing. So that provides so much refuge. And and friends and community and South Asian community, my friends in the South Asian community, writers community, musical community. And events like this provide a lot of refuge where all these elements come together, because it feels like we're family. I know we haven't met in person, but I feel a very familial feeling towards you. So now you won't be able to get rid of me. And, and we're also finding refuge in our stories and in the sharing of our stories. And I think that's stories and sharing our stories and telling our stories. Stories are a real catalyst for, long lasting positive change, because I don't know of many other ways other than actually, relationships and friendships, other ways that you can be placed so fully into another set of shoes and learn to walk and feel empathy for people whose lives may not resemble yours, or may resemble yours, or people who seem different, people who seem the same and then turn out to have kind of more nuances to their personalities. It seems like a wonderful portal into other ways of being and other ways of seeing, which can then hopefully translate into other ways of being and seeing on a larger level, such as when we vote our stories into office, for example.
I think of a lot about refuge, and I think a lot about like safety, psychological safety, because our physical safety is now in jeopardy, right, with the global pandemic.
Mhm.
And what does psychological safety mean? What does refuge mean? And I think it's I've been very much the go like South Asian, like daughter of immigrant parents, like get your degree, like set up your career, follow your passion and pursue your passion. And that of course comes out in my stories. But there was a major pause that was kind of set on all of us this year. And what exactly does refuge mean became a question that I was forced to answer, versus something that before it was just like a passing thought. So that's why I now think about it a lot, because I wondered why I didn't think about it. And I wonder why, it never really dawned on me that, like, I knew that these things were important, but was I really taking care of the things that are really important, instead of focusing on things that, in the long run are not going to be like really sustain me the way that family and community and friends will sustain me. So, in what is my refuge, or how do I take refuge? I take a little bit more time to tell my parents how I'm feeling, which is not something that I normally did, because, like oftentimes like sharing emotion is still very, like it's something that's very difficult for, I guess, our family to do. We just don't say the words as often. And I think it's a common trait with a lot of my South Asian friends as well. You just don't share emotion that way. Like you show love, often with food, often with like, did you eat, right? But now I think my refuge is spending time with those people, telling them how I feel about them, making sure that they're safe, and making sure that the family that I'm building with my husband and with my pets, we're all safe, and continuing to tell stories so that those who seek books as a way to have safety themselves, are able to have stories that they can connect with. So I think that's refuge for me. And we're all kind of, we don't know exactly the end date of it, right? So it's forced us to think about life and the way that we're living and the way that we're working and the way that we're connecting with each other in very differently. So I just hope that I can continue to stay focused on the people and the communities that have always mattered to me, but I've now really realized it as it's taken me, quite some time, and I'm sorry that a pandemic has been the driving force and having me realize the importance of refuge, but and of what my refuge is. But here we are. And so that's probably my answer. My family and my community, and making sure everyone is safe and they have the stories that I can tell.
Oh, that's huge. Thank you so much for sharing. I completely agree. I think I from my experience, I get so wrapped up in my everyday life, and I assume it's that way with, more than just me, with everyone, doing all these things. I don't have time to ever just stop and think. And I think that introspection has allowed me to realize the importance of family, like you were saying, Shiba and Tanuja, the importance of community, like you said, Nisha, and just realize those things that are safe for me. For example, I see myself in a good book. And sorry, is there an echo with my voice?
I didn't hear what you just said. You grew up with what?
Oh, no, sorry. I think there's an echo with my voice. I was saying that this time to stop and think, it's allowed me to realize what I find as refuge, like a good book. I'll sit down and read. Before, it didn't mean so much to me, but now it's a way to escape, when you can't go outside. So yes, it's huge. Thank you for sharing. And please let me know if there are problems with my audio. I feel like I'm hearing an echo. And okay, good. Okay. I have some specific questions. Oh no, actually, before we do that, we asked everyone to pick out an excerpt from their book books that they found particularly meaningful. And I would love if we could just go ahead and share that, starting with Sheba, and explain a little bit about why those excerpts are meaningful to you.
Thank you. Are we still reading for 5 minutes? How are we on time? Check.
We were planning to maybe do a little bit of the audience questions in about 10 minutes, but we can just keep the conversation going.
Okay.
5 minutes is good.
So let me let me shorten what I was going to read then. So this is an excerpt from Mariam Sharma Hits the Road, and Mariam Sharma Hits the Road is a road trip book, and it's about three best friends, and it's a book about friendship. Three best friends who go on a road trip from New Jersey to New Orleans, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and so they have to, of course, they drive through Nashville, and they stop in rural Tennessee. They're hungry, so they pull off the highway and they go to this local restaurant.
I love this.
And in the restaurant, sorry,
but I love this. Go on.
So they go in the restaurant, and I'm going to summarize part of what I was going to read. So, and there's a really sweet kind of like grandmother, white woman figure named Sylvia who greets them and jokes with them and makes them feel welcome. And there's this guy with tattoos, and he's dressed in camouflage, and he's got like a square jaw, and he looks super scary. And so they have the meal, and then they go outside, and they're about to leave, and then Ghazala, who they call Guz, one of Mariam's the protagonist, Ghazala and Omar are the two friends. Guz sees a bumper sticker on one of the pickup trucks that says, "Guns don't kill people, Muslims do." And she just gets so upset, she starts running back into the restaurant. So I'll pick up from there. Guz started running, this time toward the restaurant. "What are you doing?" I yelled, chasing after her and grabbing her arm. "You realize scary camouflage man probably has a gun." "Yeah, we are not going back in there," Omar said. "Screw him and his gun," Guz said, spit spraying from her lips. "He needs to know how hurtful that is." "Guz, please," I pleaded. "Nothing good will come out of this." She yanked her arm away and dashed into the restaurant. This time, when we entered, everyone looked up and kept on looking. "Who owns a silver Titan pickup truck?" Guz cried, chest heaving. Omar and I watched scary camouflage man, bracing for him to stand up and reveal his weapon of death. I could hear Omar praying under his breath, the first Quranic surah my grandmother taught me. But scary camouflage man did nothing, said nothing, only watched us over his ketchup-streaked plate. Sylvia stepped forward, wiping her hands with a towel. "It's mine," she said. "No." "Yours?" Guz asked. "Yes. Everything all right, sweetheart?" she continued. And then Guz starts arguing with Sylvia, formerly nice grandmother, who's now the also racist grandmother, and Mariam, realizing that these kinds of discussions are going to go nowhere, basically pushes her out the door and it's like, let's go. So I'll just finish up here. I pushed her out the door before Sylvia could reply. What we needed to do at this point was get the hell out of here. But when I opened my purse, I couldn't find the car keys. No, 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 I said. Please tell me you didn't lose them, Umar begged. They were in here. Oh my God, you guys, Guz said. He's coming. Scary camouflage man was heading toward us. We all froze, and then Guz and I stepped forward to shield Umar, but he pushed his way to stand between us, resuming his whispered prayer. As far as I could tell, scary camouflage man's hands were empty. Surely this guy couldn't be crazy enough to cold-bloodedly shoot us in broad daylight. Please don't let him be crazy enough to shoot us in broad daylight. No need to worry, scary camouflage man said, his gruff voice matching his face. I just wanted you to know not everyone around here thinks like that. I served in the army for 12 years, and I know that truth is way more complicated than what can fit on a bumper sticker. And I'll just stop there. And I chose that because, you know, elections coming up, and we always talk about how polarized this country is. So I thought that was fitting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, yeah, that was a great scene. Reading it, I kind of, oh my gosh, I have to admit, there have been so many instances where I have been so caught up in my own stereotypes that I don't realize that there is a complexity to the truth. Not everything is black and white. And I think that scene really set that in for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Tanuja, if you'd have.
Sure. So I'm going to read, I was going to read from Bombay Blues, but I think a little less context might be needed from the first book, Born Confused. So Born Confused is set in New York and New Jersey and follows the protagonist, who's 17 years old, an aspiring photographer named Dimple Lala, through one long, hot, transformative summer that turns her worlds on their head. And she's trying to bring her cultures together without falling apart in the process. And it was this, again, going back to the ABCD term, what I wanted to do with this book is redefine ABCD and change the C from confused to creative. And art is a way that Dimple finds, helps her sort of explore her identity and harmonize these different parts of her life. And she does this through her photography and her camera, Chica Chica. So I'm just going to read a bit from the beginning of Born Confused. Sorry. She'd told him I was the Indian girl. Somehow, neither description rang completely true to me in terms of how I felt inside, but the thing was, I'd never really consciously thought of myself as American either. Of course, I did the pledge too, along with everybody else for years of mornings, but like everybody else, I wasn't really thinking about the words. I mean, I definitely wanted liberty, like my best friend Gwyn had with the car keys and no curfew, and justice for all would be great, especially in high school where people were definitely not created equal. Proof? Cheerleaders. But I didn't know if that had so much to do with the stars and stripes. It seemed to be much more about the jeans and teams. So not quite Indian and not quite American. Usually I felt more along the lines of alien, however legal as my Jersey birth certificate attests to. The only times I retreated to one or the other description were when my peers didn't understand me, then I figured it was because I was too Indian, or when my family didn't get it, clearly because I was too American. And in India. Sometimes I was too Indian in America, yes, but in India, I was definitely not Indian enough. India. I had few memories of the place, but the ones I held were dream clear. Bathing in a bucket as a little girl, the unnerving richness of buffalo milk drunk from a pewter cup. My Dadaji, my grandfather, pouring tea into saucers so it would cool faster, sipping from the edge of the thin dish, never spilling a drop. A whole host of kitchen gods looking so at home in the undishwashered, unmicrowaved room. Mira Masi, my aunt, crouching on the floor to sift the stones from rice. Cows huddled in the middle of the vegetable market, sparrows nesting on their backs. Hibiscus so brilliant they looked like they caught fire. Children with red hair living in tires. a perpetual squint against sun and dust, and the most delicious orange soda I'd ever drunk, the cap split hiss, and then the bubbling jet stream down a parched throat. But mainly all my memories of India were memories of Dadaji. When he died, the entire country seemed to come unhitched, floated off my mental map of the world, and fell off the edge to mean nothing anymore, just a gaping hole fast filling with water. And at the same time, the place I had known grew fixed in my imagination, rooted in memory. When my grandfather saw me that last time, he beheld me like he couldn't quite believe his eyes. He called me by my mother's name, Shilpa, and then when she stepped in behind me and it all fell into place, the weight of all those years in between visits was visible in his slumped shoulders. To me, he'd looked the same, wearing low over a white lungi, a familiar moss and maroon plaid shirt that I realized later had been my father's. In fact, all sorts of items that mysteriously disappeared from our Springfield, New Jersey home seemed to pop up all over the little flat where Dadaji had lived with Miramasi and Dilip Kaka and my cousins. It had been a fuller household at one time. Dadaji had lit the flame to the pyre for his wife, the grandmother I summoned up only as a warmly glinting climate. Then he had to do the same for a son, Sharad, the mama uncle I also remembered faintly in physical detail, though lushly in atmosphere, an ashy dusk, the page turn of wings, half whistle, half hum. Dadaji, he made it through all these things still standing until he slipped on his chappals coming home from the garden with Marigold for the morning puja, falling hard, his hip crushed against the pedals. How a tiny thing could still create a big, big hurt. My cousins, they were a little older than me. Sangeeta, the quiet one, sporting soda bottle glasses from very early on, her eyes receded behind the thick lenses to rain-stilled crater depths, and the rest of her pretty much vanished behind Kavita. Kavita, the one who was buried in the books at NYU now, used to be pretty boisterous, a chair tipper, a tree climber, her whooping laugh shaking the branches as she monkey jumped about. The two were always dressed in clothes I'd forgotten I had, or that I'd been searching frustratedly for through all the closets of the house. Miramasi, she called these dresses frocks, which sounded like an expletive the way it spat forth from her thin mouth, and which I preferred to the actual expletive it resembled because the F word still didn't come naturally to me. She put the word to vapid use when she chided me in my Oshkosh bagashes for not being properly attired, which I found ironic considering her own daughters were so often to be found garbed in my duds. The dress with the mega radii purple polka dots, the blue jean skirt with the rainbow patterns on the back pockets, stiff pink and white taffeta numbers that looked like the result of some inadvisable union between a ballerina's tutu and a first communion dress, the cumulus of fabric floating around my young sister cousins' rail-thin bodies. I was the American cousin, the princess, the plumped-up one. Kavita never tired of pinching my cheeks, which I hated. They both giggled even when I said nothing funny and hovered around me, serving me first from the pots of fluffy rice and the silver thalis. They were always hungry to hear stories about America. Had I ever been on an escalator? Did girls talk to boys at my school? Was it true the stores stayed lit all night and supermarkets had aisles of just one thing? Had I ever met a cowboy? Kavitha began to call me her cowgirl cousin when I told her I'd once ridden a horse. They marveled at how much I ate and how quickly I spoke. At night, they gathered with homemade pista kulfi and the rest of the household to watch reruns of I Love Lucy on the remote uncontrolled television, laughing uproariously and slapping their knees at things I found cheesy at best. They sang I Want to Be in America from West Side Story. Well, just that one line, over and over and over, but with surprisingly authentic Spanish accents. They begged me to teach them new songs. Dadaji could sit for hours listening to me too, but I didn't feel like such a circus freak around him, even though, or perhaps because he didn't understand a word of English. And me and Marathi, well, I didn't know enough to get me to the other side of the room. Sure, when I was a baby, those few months in India, I'd spoken it in jigsaw pieces with him, but not since America, where I must have checked any memory of the language at customs. This was Dadaji's constant sore point with my parents. Are Ram, Krishna, and anyone else who cared to listen, how could they have been so cruel as to cut off their own flesh and blood from one another through this ultimate act of linguistic negligence? This America you speak of is like a dream, he told me once, Kavitha casually translating. I am too old to travel, and it breaks my heart I can't picture your life there. Make it real to me, Rani. Rani, I understood. He was the one in the world who called me this, my princess, my queen. I'd been lying next to him on the bed, drifting into jet-lagged sleep. Gusts of sweet tobacco-smelling air skimmed my dreams, and when I opened my eyes later, disoriented and dazed, I could hear the slap of wet laundry on concrete in the other room and Kavitha's high, merry voice teasing someone as usual. Out the slatted window, children were playing cricket and making cricket noises. Sparrows convened in the grill. And next to me, in a faded pair of my father's pajamas, was Dadaji. I realized then he'd stayed beside me the whole time, his hand inches from my forehead, waving the flies from my face before they touched down so I could sleep undisturbed. He was watching me with eyes full of questions. When I got back to America, I started taking photographs for him. He was my #1 fan, eager, insatiable, and he responded to everything, often with sketches and shots of his own, the pale blue airmail stationery addressed in his tiny slanty script, turning the inside of our mailbox azure with a faraway sky. We were going to get around this language thing. It seemed so simple, we'd use pictures to talk. So I sent him pictures of any and everything, and even the most inconsequential snapshot, like my locker door, he'd gobble up as if it were straight off the wall of a museum. After Bobby O'Malley broke up with me, I sent Dadaji pictures of the street in progress where we'd pulled our first kisses from each other, a lone lamp burning in the distance. They were all dark, grainy, a little underexposed. I think I'd used the wrong ASA. I'd labeled them some shots of the neighborhood. When he wrote back, his reply was, "You don't need him, you just need a better camera." I couldn't figure out how he'd known. My parents asked me about that one when they translated the letter, but I played dumb at the time. In that same letter, Dadaji sent a money order to my parents, the equivalent of too many rupees, with the specific instructions it was to be used only for the purchase of a, quote, serious camera for my birthday. And that's how I got her, my third eye, which is why I call her Chika Tika, for the powder my mother keeps in a little pot in the kitchen temple, the scarlet dust her own mother pressed between her brows the morning she left for America. Chika Tika, I imagined, could see far, far away, even to where Dadaji was now. Whenever I took a shot, loaded a roll, I felt his hand inches from my face, safeguarding the dream. Whenever I peered through the lens, I could nearly see him looking back at me from the other end, from a lamppost, a flower bed, even Gwyn's ever-ready grin. And with so much love in his eyes, I had to click to keep the tears from coming. I haven't gone back to India, so I haven't really seen the way in which he is not there, how that singing space has surely taken on his shape. All I knew was the pale blue letters stopped coming to me, though there seemed to be more from Miramasi to my mother now since Sangeeta's wedding preparations began. I missed the letters, but I had the camera. No one truly understood why I was so attached to it or why I liked spending so much time in my darkroom. But it was in this world where chemicals collided to coax images suddenly up out of sheer darkness that I felt most he was just beside me, abeyant, and all it would take to bring him out of shadow would be a single moment of the right chemistry. Thank you.
I love that book.
No, it was such a seminal book, right, for our generation.
Oh, thank you. That book loves you back.
So I'm going to read just a small piece from my so-called Bollywood life. It's a dream sequence. So the heroine in the story is obsessed with like 90s Bollywood movies. And she has just broken up with her boyfriend. And she has this prophecy because the family pundit basically says that she's going to meet the man of her dreams before she turns 18. And she thinks she's found him. But he's the boyfriend that she just broke up with. So now she's worried that she won't have true love the way that her family pundit has basically prescribed for her. So she's wrestling with the concept of destiny and of choice. And somehow Shah Rukh Khan in 90s Bollywood movies is supposed to help her. So I'm just going to read like a like 2 pages of the first dream sequence where Shah Rukh Khan comes to deliver some advice. In her dream, Winnie ran through the fields in a pink gown with lace sleeves. Her hair was crowned with fake white flowers and a long lace veil. She could smell the sunshine and feel the spongy grass under her feet as she traveled up the gentle slope of a hill. Winnie knew that someone was waiting for her at the top. Anticipation pumped through her, which only spurred her to quicken her pace. The train of her dress trailed behind her, and the jewel-encrusted sandals were fashionable yet functional enough for heroine running field running. In the distance, mountains rolled into a blue sea. She scanned the horizon, and that is when she saw him. He wore black pants, a black billowing shirt, a cape, a wide-brimmed hat, and a Zorro mask. He spun, arms outstretched. Shah Rukh Khan from Bazigar? Winnie said, jaw dropping, "Is that you?" Her voice traveled over the green fields and across the cliffs. King Khan, the superstar of Bollywood superstars, tore off his mask and lifted an eyebrow in his signature look. "Why, yes, senorita, it is I." Winnie shoved her billowing hair from her face. "You quoted one of your movies. Not Bazigar, but still one of your movies. This is the best dream of my life." Shah Rukh Khan swaggered towards her. "I've come to deliver a message to you to relieve your doubt." "My doubt of what?" "Of destiny," he said. "Because those who fight destiny, who fight what's written in the stars, always end up having the hardest struggle." When she reached his side, he gripped her hand and twirled her in a circle. Her veil floated around her shoulders. "Well, I don't like my destiny anymore," she said when she stopped spinning. "I can change it if I want to. It's the 21st century, Shah Rukh. Not everything is about love anymore. Look at the film industry." "You're right," he said, and lowered her into a dip. "So are you ready to struggle?" She was just imagining things because of what Pandit Omi said that night. None of this was real. But since she was dancing with Shah Rukh Khan and she had nothing to lose, she asked, "You got any advice?" He pulled her up and in Hindi said, "In life, if you want to become, achieve, or win something, listen to your heart. If your heart doesn't say something to you, then close your eyes and take the names of your mother and father like it's a mantra. Then watch. You'll achieve everything, and whatever was difficult will become easy. Victory will be yours." Okay, now you're quoting Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, and that is the most non-committal advice I have ever heard, Shah Rukh, she said. Since he was in her dream, she figured she had the right to call him out by his first name. "The title of the movie is non-committal too. Sometimes happiness, sometimes sadness. Come on." "It works," he said with another laugh. "And I'm assuming, since you're a parent and all, that you're telling me to listen to my folks. But this is my dream, and I do what I want, Shah Rukh. You always have, my friend." Friend. He let her go and started backing away towards the cliff. The fog began rolling in. Winnie waved, trying to keep him in sight. But Shah Rukh Khan's image faded as he slipped into the cloud. The only lingering part of him was his voice. "Remember, Winnie Mehta, fighting fate never works. I've made a career out of proving just how powerful destiny can be."
Wow, that is I love the humorous tone that the book takes on and Winnie's characterization. Shah Rukh Khan really is the solution to all problems. I agree with that. Um, that's one thing I learned. And Dhananjay, I didn't get a chance to say this, but I really appreciated, I don't know if you could see it, but a few times while you were reading that, I got very emotional during your excerpt because I see myself so much in Dimple because I too, my grandfather passed when I was going into the 4th grade, and those memories that I have with him in India, I luckily did not have the language barrier that Dimple had. So, I had the chance to talk to him, to communicate, and I have those memories and I have them locked away in my mind. But I appreciate so much of what Dimple is and how she chooses to live her life. So thank you for that. And
Thank you so much.
yeah,
That was my grandfather actually. He spoke English, and that pale blue airmail stationery. We wrote long letters over many years to each other. I have all of those in boxes as well. And we used that, the additional message space on kind of the back. I would draw like a picture from my day, or draw the family in our house in Wilbraham, Massachusetts, and then he would draw something in that space. And I think that became, kind of the catalyst for the spark for the photography with Dimple and her grandfather. But I had that, it's a special relationship because it's somebody you love, and it's also a connection to, a whole world, the world of your ancestors and the history of your parents, and a whole motherland that you may or may not have experienced directly. But thank you for that.
Yes, and I think in all three of these books, there's this beautiful thread of identity and community. Like, Nisha, your book, Shiva, your book. I mean, Shiva, you have three characters that are struggling with these different problems on the surface, but they're bonded together, and not only by this road trip, but there is this shared sense of, we come from one place. I understand you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people I know, like Daisy's growing up here, South Asians growing up here, relied so much on their friendships to sort of get them through this period of their life, and that's really what I want to talk about in this book.
That is, yep. And I believe I did have a question for Nisha. Let's see. Sorry, I have a document open here and I'm trying to find it. Yes. Nisha, My So-Called Bollywood Life, when I read it, obviously I was laughing the whole time. It's so humorously written. And you address kind of the balance between destiny and your own desires and your own wants in life. Can you speak to that a little bit, as not only, she struggles with it throughout the book, Winnie does, but you as an author, and growing up as, I suppose, an ABCD, I don't know. Have you seen that struggle, and what do you make from it?
So I was very fortunate. I grew up in a family where I never really questioned my identity. And I know that I'm very fortunate. There's, I think with, immigrant families coming into the US, and those who are born and raised here, internalized colonialism kind of appears in different ways. And for me, I was, like I said, just my parents have always been wonderful, that my wants and needs should be the expectations that they have and that I have for myself. And so I never really questioned whether or not, what my identity was, or what the expectations that I had as a South Asian were. My only goal was, and the one thing that my parents consistently told me was, whatever you decide to do, just do it with everything you have, with every last bit of passion and purpose and power that you have. That's all we ask of you. Like we came here and we made our choices because we want you to have choices. And so I was, and like I said, very fortunate, because that's not the case for everybody. And that's what I wanted to write about in My So-Called Bollywood Life. I wanted to have a heroine who is wrestling with expectations and passion and purpose that she sets for herself. And, that's why in the story, the parents' wishes and wants align with her wishes and wants, because that's my experience, and that's the experience that I wanted the character to have. So when it comes to whether or not, expectations or wants should align, or which one is more important to kind of align with, I think that they should be the same. And your expectations and what you want should be the same. But that is, and I keep repeating this because I think it's super important that every story is not the same. Like, that is not the case for everybody. There are specific individuals who, feel like their their purpose does not align with what their expectations are, and that's okay too. But for this book, that's what it was.
And I think that's, you know, that's the ideal. That is the ideal, to have your expectations and your wants to align. So you're working towards what makes you truly happy. And I appreciate that sentiment, you know, because a lot of the times coming from a place where I see 98% of the people that I know in the South Asian community have, you know, these expectations. They feel that things are being imposed on them. And that can create a sort of animosity towards the South Asian community for them. I know that they don't feel as close to their parents. They feel this strain to act one way at home and one way at school. And so seeing that representation through Winnie, this was cool. And I know I'm going to recommend that book to a lot of my friends. So thank you for that. I do not know if we have any more time, but I will see if we have any questions from the audience now. So we can get a little bit of their input in here. Okay, we do have a question. Okay, so Nikita asks, with the rise of more South Asian diaspora stories or actors appearing in mainstream media, have you all ever considered turning your stories or books into a TV or film project, or have you explored this? Good question. Wow.
Well, Nisha, you were saying you started that with that, right?
Yeah.
Sort of the
Yeah,
other.
no, so my so-called Bollywood life sold to Netflix. So it will be film. Just hopefully one day, knock on wood, it just goes through, depending on what happens after the pandemic. But yeah, I started with film. It sold first, and I'd love to see more and more projects get to the screen. I know that there have been a couple YA announcements recently of YA, South Asian fiction that has been adopted or has been purchased, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more representation out there in other forms of media.
So Nisha, did you have a screenplay or a treatment, or how did?
No, so I have a film agent, and basically there's a lot of hunger in Hollywood for books to be adapted into film. And so my film agent was the one who basically shopped the book, and it was picked up. There wasn't an extensive shopping process either, because the person who ended up picking it up first and then taking it to Netflix to partner with them is a producer by the name of Susan Kartsonis, who is actually a professor in my graduate studies program. So that's how we had originally connected, and that's how my film agent had connected with her, because I had basically made the introduction. So my situation is very unique. But it was a book before it was purchased for film.
So my projects, they've been optioned a few times during the years since Born Confused first came out in 2002. And what happened back then, which hopefully would not be the case anymore, is that they were having trouble casting a star in the role of Dimple to raise the money to make the movie. And the way to sort of raise the funding would have been to make the name actor have the role of Gwyn, which sort of undoes the point of a lot of the story as well, if that's kind of like, the star of the show kind of thing. And I wrote screenplays. The first couple of times it was optioned, I wrote 2 completely different screenplay adaptations for 2 very different production companies. So that was an interesting experience. And I'm in a watch this space moment right now. So hopefully I will have things to share at some point in the not too distant future, but you know how it is when you start hearing good news, by the time you can tell it, you've got like a gray beard down to your knees. But I used...
Yeah, and I'd also add, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one thing though that I did with the writing process for the novels is I used a screenplay writing book to outline the novels. So not that the novels turned out to be like screenplays, but film was sort of in my mind that way, just in terms of how to structure the plot and all, especially for Born Confused. Sorry, go ahead, Shiva.
No, I was just going to say, I think, you know, almost every author would say, you know, oh, I'd love my book to become a movie. And I think in some ways, like Tanya, you said, I think you can even actively, you know, work on the structure of the book. But other times you just have to write the book that you're driven to write, and what happens with it after is kind of out of your hands. So, you know, if you're writing a book, it would be great if it can translate into another genre. That's wonderful, but it might not, and that shouldn't be like your goal should be to write an excellent book. You know, the book that's in your heart as a book, and then if it becomes a film later, then that's wonderful. And if it doesn't, that doesn't mean anything about your book. You know, that doesn't mean your book is any less than another book that was made into a movie.
Yeah.
That is a wonderful sentiment, actually. And I think that the exposure that sometimes a film can get is awesome versus maybe a book. But again, you know, it just depends on the piece of writing. I agree. We are sort of over time. It was amazing talking with all of you. I have so many questions still left to ask, but unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. Thank you so much for being present today, Tanuja, Nisha, Shiva. It was an honor, an absolute honor to talk with you, hear your stories and your perspectives. And again, thank you to Tasveer for arranging all of this. You know, if we have more of these discussions, that's how the world progresses, right? That's how the next generation learns. And so, yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tasveer, for including me. And thank you for your work.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.